Today's episode contains material that might be difficult or upsetting to hear about, and that may potentially trigger emotional or psychological reactions in individuals who have sensitivities. Listener discretion advised. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert. And as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even one that we wish we could go back on. Today, I have Brenda Adelman as my guest. Brenda is an award-winning actor, recipient of the Hero of Forgiveness Award, and has been interviewed on over 200 podcasts, publications, radio, TV shows, and other media outlets. She's also a transformational life coach, speaker, digital course creator, storytelling coach, solo show mentor, and an author. Brenda, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Before we get started, I want to remind listeners that I ask all my guests what their most favorite app is on their phone outside of social media. So you'll want to stay to the end to hear what Brenda has to say, because we get some great suggestions. And you'll also want to stay to the end to get access to my latest freebie. So Brenda, we're going to dive right in. I want to take this step by step. And I need you to set the stage for us as it relates to the decision that you've so graciously offered to share with us today. So tell us a little bit about the background, maybe how old you were, where you were living, were you working in school? What was going on?
All right. I was an adult.
Okay.
I was living in Los Angeles, and it was a few years after something tragic happened.
Okay.
I had moved out. I had moved out to LA because I was in love with someone, but my father had shot and killed my mother and then married her sister. That was the tragic event. And what I decided, it was about 3 years after that happened, was that I needed to tell my story on stage.
Wow. Okay. So much to unpack there. Do you mind if we back up just a little bit and understand a little bit more about some of the events to understand, what decision you were faced with? So how old were you when this horrific event happened?
I was 30.
Okay. And you said you had moved out by that point in time, so you weren't living.
Yeah, I moved from New York to California, but I was extremely close with my parents. They were like my best friends, but I fell in love and I moved out to LA. And I also was an actress, so I knew that I wanted to act in LA as well.
Okay. So you leave home at whatever age you are, you leave what you think.
I left home earlier, but I moved to California.
Right. But when you did leave home, you left what you thought was a happy couple at home?
No.
Okay.
I did not leave a happy couple.
Okay.
But I left a happily dysfunctioning couple. My parents were my parents. They had, split up and got back together about 3 times over the 30 years they were together. And it kind of was things as normal, as far as, the thing about domestic violence that you don't realize when you're in it, because guns were a threat in the house, but not like, it doesn't seem real. It's like, I grew up in Brooklyn. It was like, we all shot together as a family. Like, there's all that stuff. And then there was no hitting. There was no hitting in the family. And there was one time when I was a teenager that my mother said that my father threatened her with a gun and she left. But when she got back together, I literally thought my mom must be lying, because why would someone get back together with someone who did that? So that's why, it's like I had to unpack everything and all my beliefs and everything like that, never, ever thinking that this would happen,
Wow. So how long after she moved back in after that initial threat did everything transpire?
Oh, it was like 15 years.
Oh, so it had a lot of time had
Yeah.
elapsed.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of time had elapsed. So you don't think like you're just go like I didn't think. Let me speak in I language. It's just like the highs and lows. They fought, they didn't. But their fighting was so upsetting to me. And because I love them so much, I was always like, I want to be there for my mother. I want to be there for my father. They,
Right.
just being real, they were still having a very passionate relationship and stuff like that. So it's
Wow.
like growing up in a family like that, you just don't think that's going to happen.
Right, right. Any siblings? Do you have
I
siblings?
have one brother. We have different fathers. So it
Okay.
was my father who killed our mom, and he's
Okay.
my older brother.
Okay. So he wasn't living with them
No,
either.
oh no. He
So,
moved
so
3,000 miles away. I mean,
okay,
he
okay.
moved
A little bit.
to Vienna while I moved to LA.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. My
I
goodness.
mean, I think for self-preservation, I also wanted to move away, but I did love my parents. And one of the things I say is like everything is not about that event. Like there's so much more to people than just what happens, but that was definitely a big thing to unpack and to go through.
Are you aware of whether or not there was like a triggering event or something that happened that
Yeah, there was a
precipitated?
triggering event. My mother wanted to leave him for probably the third time. And um, one of the things is that, it's very hard to get a divorce in New York. And there was a lot of money at stake. My father had a lot of money. For sure, my father, if people value different things, money is something he did. But also, there were guns. He was a tough guy. He definitely had friends that were mobs, in the mob. And I definitely think there was undiagnosed mental illness on my
Okay.
father's part. He was a very successful businessman, but you can have mental illness and function.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so that tragic event happens, and then you mentioned that he then married your aunt.
Yes, if that wasn't enough. I'm sorry. I'm laughing only because it's been 20 years. I
Okay.
got a master's in spiritual psychology. I literally had to unpack everything because he does that, and then a month later he moves in with my aunt, and I'm like, and he did have a history of cheating, but it was like impossible for my mind to accept. And remember, I loved my father, and I was dealing with the loss of my mother.
Mhm.
So in hindsight, I can see things like this, and I've talked with other family members. My father and that aunt definitely had a lack of empathy or understanding for other people and things like that. But yeah, so then he moved in with and then married my aunt.
So I guess a question that I have, and maybe our listeners do, like, were there any repercussions that he faced for
Yes, yeah.
his actions?
Course, of course. He actually went to prison a year later on a plea bargain. So it took a full year. Like the court system is insane. I just
Wow.
to say that it doesn't work. By the way, my mother had gotten a restraining order from him years before with that thing, but it's like she couldn't win with or without it, right? It was still a threatening situation. He went to jail a year later on a plea bargain for involuntary manslaughter. Um, because the gun disappeared. So there was a cleanup between the time my mom died and then his lawyer called the police 8 hours later. And so without a murder weapon, the DA, actually who was dealing with my brother at the time, not me, um, agreed that a plea bargain would be the best way to go because it would be possible he wouldn't serve any time if he went to prison. I mean, if he went before a jury with no
Trial.
murder weapon. And so my brother is the one that agreed to the plea bargain because I was kind of out of it in despair. Nobody really wanted to talk to me because they didn't know what side I was on.
Right.
So he served only 2.5 years of a 5-year sentence. Got out on good behavior. He did go
Wow.
to jail, and then actually I did forgive him, but part of my forgiveness process was I also took him to court for wrongful death after he got out of prison with my brother.
So I don't know enough about the court systems to understand, how and why that can transpire after
Let
somebody's.
me just say quickly because it might cause
Mhm.
confusion. So after there is a plea bargain, the only recourse you have as a victim is to take someone to civil court.
Okay.
So my brother and I decided to take him to civil court. I actually was very naive about it. I thought it was my father would get on the stand and he would tell us what happened finally. And, you know, 'cause he was claiming it was an accident, this and that. But civil means for money, for monetary, right? For monetary judgment. So so I took him to court to set a boundary, I think, really, for self honor, to say, I don't believe you anymore. But he skipped town. We won a $2 million judgment, but he and my aunt sold her house and they skipped town, and I then never saw him again. But yeah, and we never collected.
Oh, and so to this day, you don't know where they are.
They are both deceased now.
Oh, okay. Whew.
Yeah, it's a lot, but that and I speak about it because making the decision to make my story public was the thing that I didn't know at the time would be the key to my healing and the key to helping and healing multiple tens of thousands of people since. And
So
yeah,
let's go back to that, because I think you mentioned it was about 3 years
right.
after. So
Mhm.
is this 3 years after he's gotten out of jail? Like three
No,
years
no,
after
3 years
yeah.
after my mom was killed.
Okay.
1 year after, I decided to go back to acting class. And I spent the next about 2 years hiding behind the characters I would play because I just could not talk about anything. I was filled with shame. I hadn't done any of the inner work. And then I got this inner guidance that I had to tell my story. Like it was the key to me healing. But the first step was I started writing. Like up until then, I was thinking, I hate my father. I love my father. Well, I'm going to forgive him because it's not going to bring my mother back. But inside, I was, seething with anger. And I started writing down what I had been through. And had so much compassion for myself. Like I couldn't believe what I had lost. Like I had to get it out of my head because I was really like a shell of myself, always hiding and in shame. And when I wrote it down and I wrote poetry, it allowed everything to be dramatized and for me to really see what was inside of me and the emotions. And then the next step for me, because I was an actress, was to request to do a personal story exercise on stage. And that's the decision I made. But it was an inner, like, God decision. And I was not religious at all, but it was just in that really dark point. It was like, you must share this. And so
Wow.
I wrote one of my poems into a scene and I put that up on stage. And I was so scared. And instead of getting the judgment that I thought I would get, I got a 10-minute ovation. This is a top acting class from like 100 people. And like 3 people came over and were like, oh my God, I have to. And it wasn't even about forgiveness then. The ending of kind of the piece, it wasn't even a show then, was more like, how can I let go of this so that I can live again? And I had like 3 people come up to me and say how healing it was for them about totally different circumstances. Like someone's father left them when they were a kid and they just realized they could let it go. And that actually is what gave me the impetus to kind of explore how I could keep going with this piece and share it more. Not me, like I didn't have the strength to do it, but healing others did at that
Right.
point.
Right. Right. Wow. So it sounds like you spent a little bit of time just distracting yourself and not dealing with anything head on.
Oh, those first few years, yeah. So I was in acting class, so at least I got to express myself and even have joy at times because I'd be playing a comedy or something like that, but always so tightly wound up, so afraid to share with anyone what had happened. And for me, I feel like I went into addictions, mine being overeating and over exercising, so I didn't have to think. So really what happened for me when I broke that down is like I would overeat and I would gain weight and then I'd be so mad at myself. This is all unconscious then. And I would judge myself harshly so that I wasn't really dealing with the thing. The thing was that my father killed my mother, but I
Right.
was instead doing that. So that was a huge awakening for me. And it was really only in my master, because I went for a master's degree in spiritual psychology, is where I was able to unpack this other part.
And so help me understand the timelines when you went back to school and when you kind of came
I,
to terms with everything.
I graduated, my mom died in 95. I
Okay.
graduated in 2001 from the master's program, and I started working on my show around that time,
Okay.
originally in the class, and then it premiered later. Yeah.
So you've spent the last 20 years then using your learnings and your gifts to help other people break
Yeah.
through essentially the
Well,
same way you did?
I was an actress, so I didn't know I was going to like when I went for the master's program, I literally went for my healing. I needed to heal. And then I was performing my show here and there, and people would be like, but how did you forgive? Because it morphed in how I forgave my it morphed into how I forgave my father and freed myself after I took him to court for wrongful death, right? Having that boundary was really important.
Right.
And I would have people would be but like, how did you forgive? So I wrote a book, and then I started doing workshops on forgiveness, and I would coach on how you forgive and why it's for you. And then it morphed into teaching people how performers how to do a one person show, how
Okay.
to teach entrepreneurs how to tell their story for an impactful way, and then how to present yourself on video. But all of my work, even my storytelling method, is like find that right story, but heal from it. Don't just tell your vulnerable story and fall apart or put unhealed stuff on people. Because when I first started presenting my story, even though I know how to write scenes and dialogue and people would laugh, people would cry, I would be miserable because I hadn't done the full level of inner work.
Right.
So I believe in the storytelling concurrently doing the inner work. So I did everything. I did the master's in spiritual psychology. I did shamanic journeys. I did acupuncture. I did soul retrieval. Like I did everything I could to really look at what I had been through and how I started healing. And then I started teaching.
So as we look at that journey of forgiveness, can you identify like pre-forgiveness and post-forgiveness?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
was that
that's a
clear for you?
great question. And that's actually that's another decision point. Oh boy. I remember very vividly. My dad had gotten he my dad was getting out of prison, I think, or had gotten out. Oh, he had gotten out of prison, and he was calling me, and I was like, my inner child was like, "Oh, my dad is back," even though he didn't answer any questions. Like I didn't get what I needed. It was falling back into the role of here's dad and here's me.
Right.
Um, and he said that he was going to sue me for one third of the estate that my mother had, the money, like the house and stuff like that. And it was such a moment of knocking me out of unconscious role and the unconscious role and training I had of growing up in a family. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember hanging up the phone and calling my lawyer, who had been my mother's lawyer. My brother had wanted to take my dad to court for wrongful death from the beginning, and I just couldn't look at it. And I called him and said, I need to take my dad to court for wrongful death. And when I did, so it reconciled my brother and I because we had a falling out over
Okay.
that. And then the forgiveness came as I made that decision from a place of like seeing things for how they are. So in my 3-step forgiveness process, the first step is moving out of denial into acceptance of what is. I couldn't actually move forward until I saw him for who he was, his personality and what he was doing, and that he, didn't have empathy and all this other stuff. But then in that program in spiritual psychology, I also was learning how to find compassion and how like my anger is hurting me. And so I'm trying to think how I actually forgave him. It's like I knew that in holding up anger toward him, I was hurting myself. Like
Right.
every time I closed my heart toward him, I closed it to myself. My personal life wasn't working. I was keeping people at an arm's length because I didn't want people to see what I was going through. And it was that I decided, but it was a process. It wasn't like one moment. It was a process. I made the decision that this was hurting me, and I
Right.
had to do what I could to not have it hurt me. And then I put things in place like doing a ritual to have, with the forgiveness, talking to him and energetically and seeing what I needed for him to say back to me, things like that.
Wow. Are you typically a forgiving person?
Um, I am because it hurts me. Like I don't know if that's like I definitely wouldn't say, oh, it's because I'm so sweet or kind. It's more like um it's more self-centered, but not in a bad way. It's kind of like I liken it like this. I lose weight because I want to look good, and the side benefit is that I'm healthy,
Right. As
right? So
opposed to the other way around.
right. So I'm, what drives me is to feel better, to find joy, to be more loving, to be more kind. And one of the ways to do that, and the way I was able to do it, was through forgiveness. So that's
Right.
why I forgive. I forgive because it's more empowering for me. And then it just happens
Absolutely.
to be empowering for other people.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. You're just bringing up some thoughts for me around forgiveness, because I feel like there's an opportunity to forgive, but that doesn't necessarily relinquish somebody of their accountability, right? I
Right.
think
And
I think you can separate those, right?
you have to, because I think that's why a lot of people don't forgive, or they hold on to that anger because they think somehow it's condoning the other person. I do not condone what my father did. I didn't even have him in my life anymore, but I still think, like, oh my God, what would have happened if I would have taken him to court from revenge and then he didn't show up? It would have been worse for me. Instead, I was like, I need to do this as a self-honoring choice. And then when he didn't show up, I could like grieve what I thought was going to happen, but I'm not caught in that endless loop of, this isn't fair. What's fair in life?
Right. Right. So, you know, the forgiveness aspect, you said it kind of happened over time with all the schooling that you did and that kind of thing. So do you remember a
Going
time when
deeper.
you felt, you know, like your boundaries had been set and you were able to, like, that weight was released?
Oh yeah. Well, there were several times, really. There's a couple of really important ones. One was when he died. I realized some unconscious stuff. Like, I had thought I had completely forgiven, but when he died, I realized that my inner child was still holding on to, one day he's going to take responsibility and make this all better. And there was actually such a freedom in knowing that that wasn't going to happen. But here's the thing. Forgiveness. I worked on forgiving my dad so much because I loved him so much, but my aunt I didn't love. I was still angry with her. And though I would tell clients, you must handle it. Don't just compartmentalize, because it comes out in other ways. It leaks out, your anger leaks out toward other people that, maybe have their quality and stuff like that. But there was this moment, so you let go of the anger for yourself. There was this moment years later. I was driving from, I think, I used to live in San Diego, LA to San Diego. And my other aunt, who I'm very close with, called me to say that my aunt had died. And it's so easy to compartmentalize when someone doesn't live around you anymore, or my father was
Right.
already gone. But she tells me she died, and here I am, known in some circles as the forgiveness queen, and I go, oh, whatever. and, I'm like,
Wow.
and I get off the phone with her, and I literally see my mom, who I was so close with, come to me in a vision. And I see her welcoming her sister to the other side with open arms, just loving and loving and loving. And I just started sobbing. And I was like, this is what I tell my clients, like, don't hold on to that anger. Like, you really, and I realized that I had all that anger still in me toward her for my mother, but my mother's on the other side, and it's all love.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that
Mm-hmm.
was another moment of like, okay, this is really for me. Yeah.
Right. Looking back, do you think there's anything you'd change about how you move forward or address things?
It's funny, how most people answer and say, no, it's made me the person I am today. I don't actually feel that way. I feel like, yes, because I'm very much in like, accept what is. And yes, these things made me who I am today. However, and I was actually thinking about this recently, that in so many ways, I felt like I needed to take my dad to court for wrongful death to set the boundary. Because when I did, he took off, right?
Right.
In my mind, it was like, well, I wasn't necessarily strong enough to have him take off, but because we had this case, he left. But who knows? We always make the past like it's this or that, but who knows what would happen? Maybe something else would happen. But I still feel like maybe, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have taken him to court,
Mm.
because I still had a lot of energy tied into that, and it was so disappointing and stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I would have loved to have let go of that anger toward my aunt. sooner.
Right. Right.
So while it's kind of pat to say, oh no, everything has led me to this, um I broke up with my fiance back then, and I'm very happy and in love with my new fiance now. But
Congratulations.
thank you. But I feel like I broke up with him actually when it was beyond circumstances. It was that I felt so unlovable. I didn't want to be around someone who could witness me in this. You know what I'm saying? But this is only in hindsight. So I can say, yes, of course, there's nothing to change. But then, if I was looking at my life, I'd say, well, it'd be nice if she knew. It'd be nice if Brenda at a younger age knew there were other options. And I think that's
Right.
why I also teach about choice and forgiveness and things like that. Yeah.
Wow. Brenda, your story is amazing, and it's got me, I have a million more questions for you, but um, I want to understand today what you're doing, to help other people. What is it that you're particularly focused on?
Yes. Well, I teach anyone who pretty much is the face of their business or has a message, right, to share. So that could also be performers, or it could be someone who's gone through 12-step programs, but a lot of entrepreneurs, because I'm an entrepreneur too, how to tell their story in a way that is impactful, that ties it to their business, but that we've all lived through these things for a reason. So, how to share that story also in a vulnerable way that also is healing, because I shared before I was ready. That's one thing I probably would not take back in a decision, because
Mhm.
I would share, people would laugh and cry, and then I'd be miserable until I did all the inner work. But I feel like if I would have had someone who was like, instead of me like, I'm doing my show, now I got to take time off, finish my master's program. If I had someone who understood like that together, how you can nurture yourself while you're doing that, then it would have been a much faster process for me to get to a place of joy and freedom. And so I help storytellers do that. I help people who've lived through, I can help anyone tell a story, but I love helping people who have this thing that they're stuck in. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as mine, but like I watch them become empowered, and then I give them the tools to share as a powerful presenter so that they help other people, so that I'm sharing my message and it helps people with forgiveness, but then someone else is sharing how they got through suicide or suicide in their family or abuse, and then that lets people know they're not alone. So that's mainly what I'm doing. And I just recently led I have a forgiveness program that's usually do it yourself, Phoenix Rising, and I'm actually right now leading a 4-week program on that, because I love seeing the breakthroughs. And so that's 30 days of lessons basically from my life, how I applied and did everything to feel
Wow.
better.
Great. So if somebody was interested in learning more, is there some place they could find you?
Yes, I am on Facebook, Brenda Adelman, and I have a free group on Facebook called Soul Story Tribe. I do lead challenges. I have an opt-in that is it's not really the forgiveness one. If they reach out to me, I can give them, I have a 5 part e-course on the 5 top reasons to never forgive and why you must. But I also have a storytelling one. Speaking one. How as an
Excellent.
entrepreneur you can speak and be captivating. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. At the beginning, we talked about the last question I was going to ask you, which is what your most favorite app is on your phone, and it can't be anything in social media. And we
I
always
know.
joke, and say it can't be my Decision Smith app, because we already know that's everybody's favorite. So, what's your favorite app on your phone?
I wonder if I'm answering this incorrectly, because what I was going to say is Canva, because I love Canva so much. Is that okay? Or is that like, no, that's social media?
No, that's
Otherwise, Insight Timer.
what's that?
Oh my God, it's so amazing. It's all kinds of meditations, all different topics, anywhere from like a minute to like an hour, and it's mostly free. You can upgrade, but it's amazing. So if you have a hard time sleeping, anxiety, relaxation, Insight Timer.
Insight Timer.
Yeah.
Perfect. Brenda, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and your stories. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. If you're
Thank
ready to realize your wildest dreams, come and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women Facebook group, where we're changing people's lives one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time, make great decisions and do life fun. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch and don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.